Hi, everyone. This is Megan from Catalyst. I want to thank you for joining our new webinar today, Wow Your CMO with Social. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. We're going to wait for a few of the other attendees to get dialed in and settled, and then we'll dive in, so sit tight. Hi, everyone. This is Megan from Catalyst. To those of you just joining, thank you for dialing into our webinar today, Wow Your CMO with Social. We're going to give the rest of the attendees another minute or two to get dialed in, and then we will kick things off. So just hold tight, and we'll get started shortly. Thanks. Hi, everyone. This is Megan Lavin from Catalyst. Thank you for dialing into our webinar today, Wow Your CMO with Social, 5 Ways to Uncover Social Media Insights that Drive Business Results. We're going to get started here, but before we dive into the webinar content, we're going to go over just a few small housekeeping items for everyone. So, some instructions. You will have a webinar panel when you dial in that has all of your audio information. It will also have an area where you can ask us questions about the content or flag any issues that you may be having with the webinar software itself. No one will see these questions, and we'll be sure to address all of them at the end of the webinar. One of the questions we get most frequently is, will this webinar be recorded? The answer is yes. So after the webinar, we'll be sending out the video recording for all of you to rewatch and to share with your colleagues. Next, just some information about us. So speaking is myself, Megan Lavin. I'm on the marketing team here at Catalyst, and I'll be helping to facilitate and moderate today's session. And our expert speaker will be Lauren Vlaming. Lauren is our social group director at our Boston office, where she leads the social practice, and she's really a true social media expert and veteran, so we're very excited to have her presenting today. And before I hand it over to Lauren, I just want to provide a little bit more information about Catalyst, who we are and what we do. So Catalyst is a leading digital marketing agency that focuses on search and social marketing. And we've been at it for quite a while, actually, almost 20 years. February will be our 20th anniversary, which we're very excited and very proud about, because over the course of those 20 years, we've specialized in developing digital solutions that are innovative, effective, and always drive business results for our clients. And through today's webinar, you'll get a bit of a sneak peek into some of our innovative thinking and strategic approaches that we take to drive business results, and in this case, specifically through social media. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Lauren to start the webinar.
Great. Hi, everyone. We're going to start off today with a little poll. So if you wouldn't mind answering, we're going to make it really easy for you. It's a yes or no question this time. Are your paid social campaign KPIs aligned with your business objectives?
Okay. We'll give you guys a few more minutes, or a few more seconds actually, to respond to that, and we're going to close the poll. Okay. Wonderful. So we're going to close that.
All right, great. So it looks like a lot of you said yes. Over 80% said yes. That's fantastic. I do want you to know, if you are a business that focuses on direct response right now, just hang tight today, because you're probably looking at me saying my business objectives are sales. So yes, my KPIs are aligned. But I hope that regardless of what you do, what kind of marketing strategies that you employ, that you'll get at least one piece of information out of the discussion today. So social data, there's a lot of it. There's Pinterest, there's Snapchat, there's Facebook, there's Twitter. There is information about demographics that you can find from your page insights in Facebook. And from the Facebook advertising dashboard, there are over 1,300 outputs alone. So the question in marketing is not, do we need more data to help us do what we do and to uncover insights about our audiences? The real question is, how are we using this data, and how do we get to the data that's actually relevant for us? Despite this high volume of data, people are still having trouble measuring their return on investment. So you can see here, it's about 60% of both brands and agencies, and there's a third bar for combined, really have a hard time figuring out, what's my actual return on this? And almost 60% of people are also still using things like engagement metrics, so likes, comments, mentions, shares, and retweets. So this poll was done among agencies and brands, large to small, across verticals. It's a really global metric, but I think it's very telling that people who are having trouble measuring ROI, there's a strong correlation here to people who are using very specific metrics to measure success. As a side note, many agencies aren't currently aligning social to the business objectives of brands. So if you're currently at an agency and you're not aligned to your brand's business objectives, then this should definitely be something on your roadmap for this year. Because think about it this way, for any other channel, let's take search as an example, can you imagine telling your CMO or telling your director, we don't want to run a search campaign. We're not really sure what the outcome is going to be, but we just want to start a conversation about the brand on search. Nobody would ever get funding for that, right? Nobody would ever sign off on that. So as a preface to today's discussion, I really want to compel you to stop treating social media like a special snowflake. It is a media channel like your other media channels. It has its own strengths and weaknesses, and there are things that it has unique abilities to do. However, it should have KPIs that really resonate with the rest of your marketing strategy. So studies have been done on the metrics that are actually used to drive things like sales, assuming that that is your end result. And what Nielsen has found through global studies, this is not across one brand, this is actually through studies across many, many brands, there's no clear relationship between engagement rate and sales results. Absolutely none. There's not even a correlation between engagement rate and sales results. So not only Nielsen has done this, but Datalogics has looked into this. And Datalogics found that campaigns that maximize for reach within their target audience actually have a 70% higher offline return on investment than those that don't. So this is not a spray and pray strategy, right? You're not targeting everybody in the universe, but you are targeting people who are within your audience and really trying to maximize that visibility. GroupM has also done studies within our brand. So again, this is not a study on one brand. This is a study that we did across a portfolio of brands, where we found that if we started bidding on reach, we had significant CPM decreases over the year, and we had significant ROI increases year over year. This is due to brands who partnered with us and allowed us some visibility into their sales data. And they were very conservative with the attribution to social. So this was not a gimme for Catalyst. This was really a hard fought proof to show that if we're looking at branding campaigns, it's really important for us to look at reach. Again, DR folks, hang in there, but this does apply to you for upper funnel campaigns as well. So if you don't believe Nielsen or Datalogics or Catalyst, you might look at some of the other experts in the field right now. All of them are saying the same thing, which is that social media as kind of like a lone organic marketing strategy is not really effective anymore. That social media really is a platform that has to be treated like the rest of your platforms, your other media channels. And if you didn't read the New York Times Follower Factory article that came out this week, you should, because it really dives into the bogus metrics around the number of followers that celebrities and that other people have on social media. And the implications there are that things like followers really don't matter. And again, followers is not a media metric. Follower is what we typically call a vanity metric or an engagement metric that really has nothing to do with our business results. So Facebook itself has told people that we should not be using fluffy metrics to measure business results. They have to tell people this because the Nielsen's and the Datalogics and the Catalysts of the world are doing their own studies and showing that this is the case. So Facebook itself is telling people you need to use the same KPIs and metrics that you use in other channels if you really want to assess impact. So why is this discussion around KPIs in a webinar about social data? This is really important because if you don't know how to choose what's important to you, you won't be able to identify actionable data, period. as you're digging through these more than 1,300 different metrics that are in your Facebook dashboard, that are coming from your Pinterest report, that are coming from your Snapchat campaign, if you don't actually know what your KPIs are and you can't clearly articulate that and can't clearly streamline what that looks like on your spreadsheet, you just won't find the numbers that you're looking for. So this is really the basis for this whole presentation, is that you really have to drill down into what's important to you and to your business. And a note here on setting objectives and goals. There's a reason that I include this in this presentation, and it's that I've seen clients struggle with this over and over again. So as an example, there are certain KPIs that work really well together, and there are certain KPIs that don't work well together. Now, this is assuming that you have more than one. There's no necessity to have more than one KPI per campaign. But as an example, things like awareness, if you have like a heavy hitting branding campaign, something like a cost per acquisition is not going to map well to that campaign, simply because for a branding campaign, you need to open up your reach enough such that you're not really bidding on people who are going to view your ad necessarily, or that you want to engage with people who are going to view your ad versus people who are likely to become part of your ultimate target base. So on the flip side of that, let's say you have a very DR-focused campaign and you're looking for acquisition. A lot of times this has to do with retargeting. Things like a cost per land or a cost per acquisition are really great KPIs for a campaign like this. Something like reach or click-through rate have nothing to do with acquisition. So this is just to get you thinking about the funnel and about where your target audiences actually fall in the funnel. There are business cases for brands having more than one audience. So certainly you can be speaking to your audience in different phases of the funnel for different campaigns. But within the same campaign, we really have to look at streamlining. Again, certain metrics don't really work well together. So things like cost per acquisition or cost per land for a reach campaign are truly irrelevant. They really have nothing to do with the campaign goal. I had a client ask me about the click-through rate on a campaign a few weeks ago that had to do with reach. And I went, what? So just start thinking about how you're going to streamline your campaigns such that the data that you're gathering makes a lot of sense for your business objective. So this case study is from a mixed KPI campaign. So this is a campaign where this is a very sophisticated brand, but they had a lot of actions they wanted people to take. So they wanted people to feel good about the brand. They wanted people to watch a video. They wanted people to engage with the ad unit, and they also wanted people to click on a link. So that's a lot of actions. And this is very, very common in PR. They were using both Facebook and YouTube, and they had a couple different ad units. So they had a video ad, and then they also had an ad that had a strong call to action and a link to click through to the site. So when it came to this time to talk about what the KPIs were going to be before the campaign, it was actually very confusing to discuss KPIs because of all of these actions they wanted users to take. So should we measure sentiment was something that came up. And if we do measure sentiment, how do we map that to last year, given that the media spend is different and given that the audiences and the countries are different? Do we measure video views? Maybe we measure engagement. Maybe we measure link clicks. So you can see how confusing this gets when you don't have a clear business objective in mind as you're planning your campaign. A question that came up after the campaign was, why were our engagements down from last year? So this is interesting because this particular campaign was actually very successful based on all the KPIs that were set at the beginning of the campaign. Everything was blown out of the water. So this question didn't come from somebody in the marketing department. It came from somebody else outside who just looked at one number and said, well, why is this one number different? And there were some answers to that. For example, the media spend was different year over year. But what I want to emphasize here is when you really look at the actions that you want your audience to take and you let those things guide your decisions, we're not going to have questions around a KPI that is either unrelated to your campaign or was not the focus, or was secondary. So as an example, if we really want people to watch a video, let's pick the best video platform. And in my experience, that's YouTube. That's because I can get a verified view on YouTube, which means that my average view duration is something more like 60 seconds versus Facebook's 3 seconds or 6 seconds. Let's only use a video ad, and then let's use video views as our KPI. It's pretty simple. The same goes for something that's a little bit lower down the funnel. If we want people to click on an ad to make it through to our website, let's utilize Facebook because that's the best social website in terms of getting traffic to the site. Let's only use an ad unit that is known for driving CTR, for driving those clicks, and then let's measure clicks to site. So it's not to say that every campaign has to be super simple, but it does mean that you should be able to stand in an elevator and sort of give your elevator pitch to someone about what the campaign is and what you're measuring. It shouldn't be fluffy. It really shouldn't be difficult to explain. It should be pretty easy for you. And it's only with this kind of foundation that you can actually start building really sophisticated campaigns because it makes it very obvious what you're measuring. So all of these metrics are actually super inexpensive right now on social. And they're super inexpensive because nobody wants them because they're kind of crap metrics. And Facebook knows it, the other social platforms know it. They still offer them, but they're not pushing them anymore because they understand how their platform has changed and how smart marketers are changing with them. So I sort of liken this to buying a skateboard versus buying a Jaguar. If I wanted to drive one across the country, one could get me there, but it's going to cause me a lot of pain. And honestly, it's probably going to break down before I get there anyway. If I want to drive across the country, I'm going to take a Jaguar, right? So I'm going to take some metrics that make sense for me and that I'm going to be able to convince my CMO about. So if you are currently working in an industry or rather a business where you have a director or a CMO who thinks that these engagement metrics are really important, you might have a couple of struggles. So the first is in the short term, you might end up chasing your tail as you try to replicate campaign results month over month or year over year. And the social platforms are changing to sort of, I'm not going to say phase these out, but to phase out the importance of things like this. The second problem you're going to have in the long term is that you or your department will struggle to secure funding because when the people who run the numbers start to ask about the return on social, that money is going to dry up for your department. So lovely things that you can and should discuss within your marketing department include things like brand lift, right? If we're a real branding focused business, maybe we have no e-commerce, like we don't sell things on the website, things like a brand lift study, whether it's via Facebook or someone else, is a really great way to do a controlled study and realize some lift on your marketing messaging or maybe product consideration, things like that. So there are ways to measure at the top of the funnel that are vetted and are very numbers based and will do you a lot of good in the long term. So let's talk about some tactics that you can take. The first is to start looking at real-time data. So this goes beyond the trending hashtag. This is a great case study from a fast food brand that we had that had several locations. And they started with dynamic location ads, which means that they were served to users who were within a reasonable radius of one of their stores. And this brand was trying to bring people in for a couple different meals. The first was sort of a single meal, and then the second was sort of a family style meal that they were really trying to attract moms to come in and buy this meal for their family. But what they did that was really interesting was they layered day parting on top of these location ads, which means that they were not targeting users 24 hours a day because people only eat at certain times of day. So that kind of tends to be around lunch and tends to be around dinner. And what they were able to do is they were able to drive over 180,000 store visits from the users who were exposed. Now, this was a very conservative number that was submitted by the brand based on the average store visits and based on the data that they were able to pull from the campaign. So this was not a gimme for the social team. This was like a very conservative estimate of what happened. Their average cost per visit was under $1.20, and their return was over $7.80, which is incredible for this industry. And they did this based on real-time data. So what are things that you can do that are in the same vein? You can drill into your time of day data. You don't have to be a business who is time sensitive. It could just be about our customers responding to you at a certain time of day. You can do things like compare impressions versus click-through versus conversion, because just because you're delivering a lot of impressions at a certain time of day doesn't mean that's when your click-through rate is the highest. So as an example, I worked with a financial client a while back who, once we dug into the data, we found that their click-through rate on LinkedIn was higher on the weekends than it was during the weekdays. And we surmised that was because busy executives were not able to sit down and read content during the week, but they would save it, and then at the end of the week, they would be able to read through it. So we were able to turn off those ads or pause those ads Monday through Friday, and then we were able to turn them on and spend more on the weekends in order to really optimize for that click-through rate. And you can also look at website timing. So are there slow periods on the website? Are there times when we really need social to drive more traffic? Social can actually work to supplement for the traffic that maybe isn't coming into the website organically during those times. So number two, you can use social listening to identify interest, or let's hope not, negativity about your business. So this goes beyond the trending hashtag, and this does not mean that you have to use a Radian 6 or something that's really expensive and fancy like a brand watch. This could be a very simple social listening tool to do this. We had a client who had this brand new car model, and they noticed that there was a lot of positive sentiment on social, and we did this through social listening. So the brand wanted to leverage this sentiment. Like, how do we actually do this such that like this doesn't go to waste on social? Now, in the old world, we might have said, let's create a hashtag and let's share the hashtag and hope that everybody else shares the hashtag. But that's not what we did. We really wanted to take kind of a media rigor approach to this. So instead, we created these custom Twitter lead gen cards, which allowed users to build their car model in the Twitter dashboard. So obviously without leaving the platform. All the same things that you would do on the website. You could pick the color, you could pick the exterior, all that kind of stuff. Ultimately, we sent those leads directly to the dealers. So there was a process in place on the client side such that these leads went to the dealers, and the dealers were required to follow up in a timely fashion and then pass that data back to the corporate headquarters. So automotive, this is sort of a sticking point for automotive as a whole, because it's difficult to pass that data back and forth. But once we were able to bridge that gap, we generated over 380 leads within just the first month. And ultimately, they ended up with 9 sales. So for luxury automotive, this is incredible. Their ROAS was over 730%. All because they skipped the trending hashtag and decided to actually do something that had some media rigor attached to it. So what could you do? What are some things that you can start thinking about in this vein? If there's already positive sentiment online, what do we do to leverage these conversations to drive consideration, to increase traffic? It doesn't have to be about sales or acquiring leads. It could just be about moving people through the funnel at their own pace. If there is negative sentiment online, maybe we submit the feedback to the appropriate team, so customer service, product, marketing, and really help to address those issues. The other thing you can do is figure out, are people using your product in alternate ways? So is your product, especially if it's a smaller product, is it being used in ways that the brand or the business isn't familiar with? And is there a way to really consult with product and marketing to capitalize on that. So an example, I was talking with a coworker a couple of weeks ago, and all these parents are making slime for their kids right now. And there are different recipes online, but the main ingredients, depending on which recipe you use, are see-through glue and borax. So my coworker went to 3 different places to find see-through glue or transparent glue for his kid, because apparently it's very difficult to find. And he went into Staples, and he could see on the shelf where the transparent glue was supposed to be, but it was completely empty. So, we talked about, wow, what a great opportunity for Staples. At the very least, Staples could be doing some social listening and realize that this is a big opportunity, and they could, at the very least, be stocking a lot of transparent glue, because you couldn't find it anywhere else in town. But maybe there's a step farther that they could go. Maybe they could start packaging borax and see-through glue together, even though borax is not something you would usually find at Staples, right? But here's your slime package that we created for you, and you don't have to go anywhere else to get it. And maybe there's a teeny tiny marketing campaign on top of that. So Staples is a huge entity, but you get the idea here. There are ways to really figure out what's going on online and to really capitalize on that for your business. So similarly, we really want to mine the social comments for product feedback. So this is a little bit more direct in terms of how people are perceiving your product. We had a telecom client who was preparing for launch, and they had already completed all of the creative. So everything was done, knots were tied, it was ready to go, and they decided to use social as the first part of the media strategy, and they were going to run these teaser posts. What happened when this social campaign launched was that the comments and questions that users were asking were really centered around how the device worked with a specific plan that was not featured anywhere. So we quickly realized that people needed these questions answered to be able to convert and to be able to go buy this plan. So what we did was we were able to liaise with the search team and update the search copy very, very quickly, such that the questions that people had about this plan were being answered in the search copy. And ultimately, that part of the media campaign ended up generating the best CTR and the best cost of the entire campaign. So things that you can do around this. And again, this is not about having some enormous team who is answering questions on social. This can be one community manager or one director who's really paying attention to the commentary that's happening across the board. So things like, what questions do users have about your product? What do users love about your product? What do people dislike about your product? So an example that I think will live in marketing history for the rest of time is the Domino's pizza story. And the reason that story is so successful is because Domino's actually took a minute and decided to listen to its customers. And so if you recall quickly, Domino's Pizza was really bad for years and it was losing a lot of market share because people just couldn't stand it. And there was Papa John's, there's a lot of competition in that space, including local pizzerias and things like that. And so Domino's Pizza was able to start listening to comments through social and through other venues as well as to what people did and did not like about it. Now, ultimately, this turned into a larger project, right? This is not just a social project. This involved things like focus groups and the product teams and lots of other things. But ultimately, Domino's changed its pizza recipe, and now it's a really decent pizza. And it may be your jam, it may be not, but compared to what it was, they've made enormous strides. So we'll do a quick poll. And if you want to just chat me your answers, you can. Who has tried Domino's Pizza in the last 2 years?
for the folks who are still listening in, I think we may be having a bit of technical difficulty, so just bear with us for 1 minute as we resolve that. Just hold tight. We'll be right back. All right, and we should be back. Lauren, back to you.
All right, great. So at the end, if you have any questions, especially if we dropped off for you where you are, let us know and we'll certainly come back to this. Number 4, you can layer data in order to really glean a lot more insight. So for example, you can use geographic plus behavioral data to identify intent. This was an example that we used with another telecom brand, and we were actually doing some conquesting here. So targeting users who were on other carriers who were exhibiting behaviors of comparison shopping. We also used this for a different business unit where we targeted people who were exhibiting behaviors of moving into a new zip code that had the client store there. So what we found was the campaign was incredibly successful. So in the first month alone, there were more than 500 orders. And we have continued this campaign such that there have been more than 8,000 orders since launch. And it not only improved the cost per order on social, but it improved the cost per order for the entire campaign. And so social ended up being one of the major drivers for this campaign. And it was all because the client said yes to location data, which is very important when you have a standalone store and you have multiple stores. But it's also important to look at that behavioral data and to layer that on. So how can you use this? Really start to look at your location data. So even if your business is not geo-sensitive, are there top performing locations that you can look at? An example of this is we had a client who one of their business lines included nail polish. And we were able to start pulling data that was showing that users in different locations of the country were talking about different colors of nail polish. So as an example, people in New York were wearing a lot of black nail polish and people in Texas were wearing a lot of mauve. So there wasn't a social implication for this immediately. But what we were able to do is to pass that data up through the marketing channel. And ultimately the brand decided to change the store shelves in those different regions based on what colors people were talking about. So it's important to remember that sometimes we're mining social data and it doesn't directly go back into social. A lot of times we're going to pass that along to the relevant department, and that can have a lot more impact than just keeping that information to ourselves. So again, you want to look at things like impressions versus click-through versus conversion, because those things might vary on a geo by geo basis. And you really want to look at, can you optimize for top performing geos? Because that's the ideal scenario, right? Is if you have leeway to say New York needs a lot more money than Wisconsin does, we really need to shift the spend there. But even if you can't, can you make a business case to your CMO or to your director to start with a larger spend in certain locations, which is ultimately going to positively impact your campaign? Number 5, when all else fails, you can steal data from other channels. We like to do this quite a bit at Catalyst. It's one of our favorites. So we had a client who we were able to gather their search keywords. We were able to actually look at the top 25 performing search keywords and phrases. And we realized that we had an audience outage on Facebook. So there were key audiences that we weren't targeting on social that we should have been. And so based on these keywords that the search team was able to provide for us, we created new audiences on social. And the impact was pretty incredible. So over half of the new audiences created are still currently performing better than the audiences created in the original targeting. So anytime that you can pass back and forth data from search and social, especially when it comes to audience creation, the two platforms have some unique ways that they target people, and there are some differences, obviously. We find that this drives really great results. So how can you do the same, or how can you do something similar? Start comparing your audiences in search and social. So start thinking about how they're the same and start thinking about how they're different. You should also start looking at things like top performing keywords in search, as well as small pockets of performance. So maybe it's not in the top 25, right? But maybe there's like a small pocket somewhere that is performing really well for its size. And the way to scale that is to take that audience to social, where it's a lot cheaper to bid for those people than it is on search, because maybe those people are higher up the funnel. You should also look at things like, do certain geos, demos, or segments perform well for certain keywords? Again, that's a pocket of performance that might be scalable on social. And looking at when we have both search and social in market, is search actually capturing the created intent from social? So, if you do have something like a trending hashtag or a unique phrase that you're using in search, or in social rather, is search actually capturing those people, and are you creating ad copy for those unique searches? As an example, we had an auto brand who did a pretty rigorous test on search and social in market at the same time, and we found that they had a 13% lift overall in both organic and paid search referred site visits when both were in market at the same time. They also had almost a 10% lift in website visits due to Facebook ad exposure, as well as some other pretty stellar results. And so we found that again and again, having both in market at the same time is truly the way to go. And some final quick tips for you. So number one, ad sets are everything. Platforms like Facebook are going to let you break things down by demo, geo, location, things like that. However, the way that you build the ad sets is going to give you more leverage to break things down later. So if you want to break things down by audience, that's the most common. You're going to build those into different ad sets. If you want to break something down into geo, demo, behavioral, and something else, you want to build out that ad set in advance. You want to visualize the data to create impact. So occasionally there are directors and CMOs who don't want the visuals, they want the Excel spreadsheet, and that's great. Don't hurt those people by giving them visuals. However, for the other 95% of us in the world, give us a quick visual that we can read. And then the last thing I want to remind you to do is iterate. So if you walk away and you take one idea today and you apply it to your social campaigns, I'm going to be thrilled. If you walk away with one idea and then you start to iterate on that idea, then we'll let you lead the next webinar, because it's the people who are iterating who are really developing new ideas and are really making an impact as far as social media is concerned. So just a reminder not to take the one idea, but to keep going.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. I hope everyone found that content helpful and valuable. If you did, we have a bunch of other great webinars on our website. You can find them by going to catalystdigital.com, clicking the About button, and then there'll be a drop down for all of our latest webinars. And our next webinar is scheduled for March 22nd at 1:15 Eastern Time, and that one will be Creating Impact, 7 Tips for Content that Builds Your Brand and Drives Business Results. You can also access it and register for it from our website. And before we conclude things here, I want to take just a minute or two to address some of the great questions that came in throughout the course of the webinar. So one of our first ones here is, What is your suggestion for established companies that want to brand a new product? For instance, a perfume company that launches a new fragrance under a new name.
Oh, that's a great question. So I would definitely say look at a really high reach branding campaign. And I would start with some of the off-the-shelf targeting from Facebook. I mean, you would look at things that probably everybody would look at, like people who are interested in beauty and people who are interested in perfume. But then I might also see if I can glean some data from other places. So it's not to make your audience infinitesimally small. You want it to be pretty large still, but I think I would look at some things that might speak more to your particular product or the type of people that use it. So that's a sufficiently vague answer for you without knowing your product. But, for example, if you know that Ohio over-indexes for perfume use, like maybe you start a micro campaign in Ohio to see how that goes, and then you can scale it elsewhere. But it's not to say that you can't start everywhere. It's just to say, pull some additional data besides just perfume lovers from the Facebook dashboard.
Great. There's a few more here. Do you have a social comment mining template or best practices or any recommendation for how to go about that?
That's a good question. So no template on our end. I think that social comments that are actually impactful for your business are fewer and far between. And that's why, as a miner, you, as a community manager, really have to kind of monitor those comments daily and to figure out kind of what are the gems, and the rest of it is fluff and you don't need to keep necessarily. So I think that, you can use your best judgment, your intuition, and what to go to your supervisor with and say, hey, this person really has a point. I just wanted to escalate this. And isn't it great if you're the person who says, I have a product recommendation based on someone who is commenting on Pinterest, right? So I think that no template, but use your gut there. I think that's the best way to go. And as far as best practices are concerned, this sort of delves into community management a little bit, which we don't do a lot of at Catalyst anymore. But obviously, like standard community management practices are in place in the way that you treat your customers. So certainly responding to people who have comments that you think are relevant, like just letting them know, hey, this is really important and I'm actually escalating this, I think is the way to go there.
Great. I think we have time for one last question here. So okay. Here is the last one for today. Our search and social teams are pretty siloed, one in-house, one agency. How do we go about sharing data?
Yeah, so this is really common. Even if you have two agencies or you have both search and social in-house, it's really common for both departments to sort of operate independently. I think what we've found is that over time, creating processes that allow those communications to happen are really important. So it could be something like our search and social reporting calls are the same call, such that everybody is getting the information. It could be that those calls are still separate, but the search and social teams have a 15-minute debrief weekly to talk about things that they've noticed. So I think that there are different ways to go about it, but I think the important thing is for you to sit down and discuss how processes are going to help you bridge that gap, whether it's phone calls, emails, a Slack group, any way that you can start having some process around that, and start having some process around, the search team saw that X keyword increased 30% last week in search. Right? When that happens, we should go to the social team and let them know about it. So just understanding what the outliers are and understanding that there should be, and if X happens, then we need to do Y on both sides.
Great. Wonderful. Well, that brings us right to the 2 o'clock mark, everyone. So thank you, Lauren, and thank you everyone who dialed in today. We hope these 5 tips were helpful, and like I had mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will be sharing out the recording to everyone who registered, so stay tuned to that so you can refer back to the content and share with your colleagues. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.